Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. The webinar will start shortly. We're just going to wait a few more minutes just to ensure that everyone has joined us. Thank you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So hello and welcome to the Fall 2021 Roadway Watercourse Crossing webinar series, presented by the Alberta Watercourse Crossing Collaborative and sponsored by the Alberta Conservation Association. My name is Matthew Huberto, and I'll be your host throughout this webinar series. The Alberta Watercourse Crossing Collaborative is a non-for-profit organization whose primary objective is to restore lost and damaged fish habitat from poorly installed and maintained watercourse crossings. We achieve this objective through education and information transfer from subject matter experts to practitioners. This webinar series was created to help achieve those objectives by discussing important topics in an easily accessible format. All of these webinars are recorded and will be made available on AWC3's website. After today's presentation, there will be a question and answer period. Questions can be asked by using the webinar toolbar located on the right side of your screen, which will allow you to type in questions. Today's webinar will be presented by Brandon Allen from the Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute on the subject of stream connectivity models. Brandon Allen is an applied ecologist with the Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute. He received his Master's in Science from the University of Calgary in 2016, where he focused on identifying the distribution of hybridization in West Slope cutthroat trout and the genetic consequences of population collapse in Alberta walleye populations. Currently, his focus is on the development and reporting of biodiversity and landscape-based indicators for local and regional planning initiatives. Without further ado, here's Brandon.
Sorry, can everybody hear me now? Been having
Yep,
a few technical issues there. And everyone can see the screen?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. So today I'm going to be talking about the new stream connectivity indicator for Alberta that has just been publicly released on GeoDiscover Alberta. So what is connectivity? So connectivity is just the measuring the degree at which a landscape facilitates or impedes movement between a patch. This can take many different forms. This can be birds migrating from southern United States all the way up in Canada and how they have to move between forested patches. This could be a groundhog that's trying to decide if it should move between one field or another and if it should cross a road. Or it can be in an aquatic system of fish species deciding which stream segments they should occupy. Now, connectivity is a really good indicator for regional assessments because it is known to have both direct and indirect impacts on biodiversity. So it kind of captures all of these different interacting patterns of how hard it is to move across the landscape, how suitable patches are, and their configuration on the landscape. So when we refer to stream connectivity, we're just referring to connections between upstream and downstream segments of a river or stream network. Now, this also refers to, or also includes habitats such as lakes or wetlands. And so it's just trying to restrict it to this aquatic system. Now, connectivity indicators can take a few different forms. They can be structural in nature. So this is kind of assessing what is the distribution and pattern of streams within a watershed, or they can take more of a functional form where they start incorporating things like a species dispersal capabilities, how hard it is to move through different barrier types, and how often different habitats occur on the landscape. In regards to which approach you take, there are tons of barriers that species encounter out there. There are some natural features. I think everybody can envision that a waterfall or a beaver dam will act as a barrier for the upstream movement of some fish species. Not all in some cases, but there are some. But most of it is anthropogenic development. And the biggest one that we have in Alberta are road stream crossings. So these are some images of fieldwork that was done by Woodlands North in 2018 for the ABMI. And this is kind of up in the Fort McMurray region, and there are a lot of hanging culverts. And culverts don't always come in hanging forms. We got images of some that were crushed, some that had high flow velocities, and there's just countless issues that can go wrong with a culvert over time. And when you have tens to thousands to hundreds of thousands of culverts in the landscape, you're going to see some significant impacts to connectivity. So connectivity it's a fairly intuitive measure. It's one of those indicators that when you have a simple example of one or two crossings, you can kind of mentally just visually look at it and be like, oh, this makes sense. It's an indicator that gets very complicated once you try to incorporate tens of thousands of crossings. So in this theoretical example here, we have a bunch of stream segments represented by these circle patches. And we have all of these connections between them. Some of them are road stream crossings, some might be confluents coming together. Maybe there's a beaver dam there, but they all have different barriers existing. So if we go to the letter A there and we put a barrier on the landscape and say it's impassable, I think most of us would agree that the impact of connectivity is relatively low. Only one small stream segment's been isolated where the rest of the network is intact. If we move to B, it becomes a bit more severe. There's 5 more upstream segments that become impacted. So that's going to probably lower connectivity. And if we decide to put a barrier at C, I think most of us would agree that connectivity has become severely impacted. You have half of the watershed that is not able to get to the other part. But then these easy examples that make sense, but as soon as we start saying what if A is blocked, B is blocked, C is blocked, and we have 100 more culverts on the landscape, it gets really hard to quantify and understand how connectivity has been impacted. So the ABMI in partnership with Alberta Environment and Parks has been developing the stream connectivity indicator for Alberta for about 3 years now. It was exploratory assessments were done in 2018 and a few contracts were performed. And the main bulk of the work kind of started in 2019. So this indicator it's not anything completely new. We went to the literature and figured out which types of indicators were already out there and being used, and we ended up going with an indicator by Dybel et al. This index provided a lot of flexibility for us. It allowed us to incorporate tons of different measures into what could impact habitat. There are things such as habitat quality or dispersal distance parameters. So it just allows us to have really detailed assessments at small spatial scales if we need to, but then if we need to do a larger regional assessment where data is maybe a bit more sparse, we can adjust the indicator appropriately. And like I said, this indicator was just recently released. So version 1 is available on GeoDiscover Alberta. So it's a freely available GIS layer that you can use. And I'll show you some examples of what that layer contains. So for our stream connectivity indicator, it incorporates the following measures. So we know information about the stream lengths. We know how they're distributed on the landscape, so all of their connections. We have information on their habitat type. So we used Strahler order as a proxy of different habitats. But we also included information on open water lakes, because we know that that is also an essential habitat for many fish species. We know the distances between all of our streams, and we also have a large database that assesses the cumulative probability of movement between all of these stream segments. So it's not just looking at how hard it is to get from one stream segment to another and maybe passing one barrier. It's what is that cumulative probability that you can actually pass 10 barriers or 20 barriers and successfully make it there. So to do this work, we needed a ton of data. There are a lot of data sources and layers that went into making this. First, we needed a provincial stream network. So there was a lot of debate over which layer we were going to use, and we ended up choosing the ArcHydro 2 layer. We know that there are some issues with it, and we know that there's going to be updates to this layer in the future, but this indicator was planned from the get-go to be provincial in scope. So even though we know that wet areas mapping is a really detailed inventory in the forested regions, we wanted to make sure that we had one consistent layer that was comparable for every watershed in the province. For identifying where road stream crossings occur, we use all of the ABMI human footprint inventories. So the example on the right here is the roads and rails inventory based on 2018 information. It looks like it's quite dense in a lot of the province. There's a few spots in northern Alberta that really don't have any roads or rails. But as you can see, there's probably a large number of crossings that do occur in Alberta. And one of the nice things of using the ABMI data is that we have information for multiple years. So we not only calculated connectivity based on the 2018 human footprint inventory, but we calculated scores based on 2010, 2014, 2016, and 2018. So we have a bit of a time series of how connectivity has changed over time as a result of expanding road infrastructure. So we have our stream layer, we have our road and rails layer, and it's fairly straightforward to just do an intersection to determine where all of those crossings potentially occur. But we decided to grab a bunch of different sources. So we grabbed a bunch of survey data. So this was in partnership with the Watercourse Crossing Program and some of the published literature that was out there on surveys done in Alberta, plus a contract through Woodlands North. And we ended up with several thousand surveyed culverts within the province. You can see most of them are kind of restricted to the foothills region, and you can see there's a few big blobs of the Swan River and Burland and Wild Hay that have received a lot of attention lately. So any road stream intersection that we identified from the GIS layers, we used the survey data whenever it was available. So this could be a survey of a crushed culvert, this could be a survey of a destroyed culvert or debris blockages, any sort that would cause movement to be impaired. Now we also used bridge information, so this is taken from Alberta Transportation, and for the most part, bridges aren't going to offer negative consequences to connectivity. Most species, when we're talking about invertebrates or fish, are going to move through a bridge fine. There might be the odd scenario where a piece of bridge infrastructure has collapsed that is maybe causing blockages, but for the most part, we assumed that all bridges in the province are going to not impact connectivity. And the inverse was true for dams. So there are some dams that are picked up in the intersections between the stream network and the road network. I can think of dams like Ghost Dam where there's some roads that go across the dam, even if it's just for maintenance purposes. But there are lots of dams that don't have anything like that. So we ended up snapping all of the dam infrastructure that we have from Alberta Environment and Parks to the stream network, and we said that all dams are going to act as barriers to movement on the landscape. There are likely a few dams that have infrastructure in place, such as fish ladders to allow movement, but until we're able to kind of do a deep dive into this data and get that type of information, we just made the assumption that all dams are going to act as a barrier. And then the last kind of thing that we got for road stream crossing data is the mineable region. So this was a really challenging region to tackle because on active mining leases, there are two things going on. First, water that is within the active lease should be maintained on site. So there needs to be some control structures in place to make sure that potentially contaminated water isn't flowing back into the stream. And then on top of that, a lot of these streams are destroyed. They might be just completely removed or diverted for various exploration purposes. So in the mineable region, we made the assumption that basically any stream connection in the mineable region is not a barrier. And this is just because we can't really pick up if streams have been destroyed very well using one static stream network. And we know that there are regulations in place that should be preventing water from moving outside of that mineable region. Again, just to reiterate, we did only use the active mining leases. So there are a few leases out there that have been purchased, but there aren't any active developments going on them. So we made sure that there was human footprint occurring within that lease before we made these assumptions. So even with all of that data, we have with all the bridge data, the culvert surveys that have been done, that might cover a few thousand to maybe tens of thousands of culverts if we're really lucky, but most of the culverts in the province or road stream crossing the province are not sampled. So to tackle this problem, we ended up developing a model to predict the probability that a culvert is hanging. So this was in collaboration with the Watercourse crossing programs using all of their data. And we built a model that was based on local topography and stream characteristics, as well as watershed characteristics. So things such as drainage density, the local slope of a culvert, the confluence bound slope feeding into that culvert, the amount of upstream distance also feeding into the culvert. And these parameters are all used to create a boosted regression tree model for predicting this. So the figure on the right here is the average output. So for each watershed at the Huck 8 scale, this is representing the average passability for culverts that fall within that region. And you can see, as we would expect, hanging culverts are predominantly located within the foothills region. There might be a few culverts here and there elsewhere in the province. But for the most part, it is, really just that. The foothills is the most susceptible to this type of barrier. Now, we know that this doesn't cover all types of barriers on the landscape. Like I've mentioned, there are beaver dams, debris blockages, crushed culverts. So we're actively working on developing additional models that could fill in some of those blanks of giving a more accurate representation of blockages that are occurring elsewhere in the province. So with this data, we have all our culvert data, our stream data, we know the habitats that are existing on the landscape, we know the probability of moving through these blockages. We can estimate the amount of connectivity for different watersheds. So this is, I believe, the Wild Hay watershed, and you can see there are several hundred culverts at these black dots all throughout the watershed, and the colors of the streamlines are representing the amount of connectivity to that segment. So there's lots of higher order stream segments that are not connected right now, where there are other parts of the watershed that are highly connected. So this type of information can be really helpful in targeting which culverts might help, repairing which culverts would help improve connectivity the most, and also give that visual representation of just how bad connectivity really is in some of these watersheds. Now, releasing this type of data gets kind of complicated with just size limits. So for a regional reporting indicator, we aggregated all of these values to the Huck 8 watershed scale. So this figure on the right here is representing the stream connectivity of each Huck 8 watershed based on the 2018 status. So you can see there are lots of watersheds that are heavily impacted within the foothills. There are some that have connectivity as low as 25%, which is quite concerning for sure, but I don't think that this is anything new or unexpected. I think most people have been well aware that connectivity has been hindered in several parts of the province. So I don't feel like these are particularly shocking results, but it is nice to have values for the whole province. One of the positive things is that there are sections that are relatively intact. There are a few watersheds in the foothills that are intact, and some of this is just due to there's currently no road infrastructure in some of these watersheds, so there's little opportunity for barriers to exist. But if you go into northern Alberta, there are some roads here and there, but for the most part, connectivity has just been maintained. Where it gets a little worrisome is seeing how things have changed over time. So if we compared the amount of connectivity based on the 2010 roads and rails inventories compared to 2018, there are lots of watersheds that have experienced significant declines, and upwards of 15% in some parts of the province. And what's happening here is you can see a few of those dark purple watersheds in kind of central and north central Alberta that a lot of new road infrastructure is being built there. And even if every culvert on the landscape has a 99% probability of successful movement through them, once you throw on 10 or 100 or 1,000, connectivity starts to be impacted. There's just very low likelihood that you make it through 1,000 culverts, even if it is only a 1% chance of failure each time. From a good news standpoint, we do see some improvements in a few different watersheds. Some of this is just due to how and when the survey data was collected. So again, we're using this ground truth survey data whenever possible, but most of this data has mostly been collected since 2016, 2017, and onward. So in some instances in 2010, we had to rely on a model-based estimate for passability at a crossing. And then once the survey was completed, we were able to update it. So we're unable to tell if that culvert was previously passable, or is it just when it was surveyed, maybe it was new infrastructure in place that allowed it to be passable. One of the other things, though, that we have seen is that there are lots of bridges that have replaced some of these crossings. So there are scenarios where connectivity has been improved because we've improved the infrastructure. So it's good to see that there are instances where connectivity is improving, but there is lots of room for efforts to be put in place to repair culverts that are high priority and to kind of discourage future development in some of these areas where connectivity is intact at the moment. So there's a lot of next steps that we're working on right now. So from data update standpoint, we are continually working on updating the human footprint layers at ABMI. So whenever there is a new one released, we will update this indicator to have the latest human footprint information available. But we do know that there are improvements to the stream indicator, stream network as well. So whenever our Hydro 5 is released in the coming years, we will be incorporating that, or at least doing a full assessment to make sure that it meets our needs for this regional indicator. We're also working very closely with the Watercourse Crossing Program. So whenever they collect survey data, we are actively incorporating all of that data. And that's being used to first improve this model that we've developed for predicting if a culvert is hanging, and then to make sure that we're using ground truth data whenever possible for assessing connectivity. So we do have a technical document that is just working its way through the final stages. So hopefully in the next few months or so, there will also be a technical document that walks through the details behind all of the math and the equations and the accuracy of all the GIS layers that for those of you that are more technically minded can view as well. From an integration standpoint, we are working with Axel Anderson and the group there to provide them the code base that was developed for this indicator. So the idea is to help the Watercourse Crossing Program use the hanging culvert model to help prioritize where assessments should occur. And then we're also using a modification on this connectivity measure to help identify which culverts have the highest impact on connectivity. So hopefully these efforts can help them identify culverts in the landscape that should be inspected first when limited dollars are available. And then from a technical support side of things, we are very much happy to support any use of the GIS layer. Again, it's freely available, so you can take it and use it how you will, but if there's any questions, we're still very happy to help out with that. And we're also working on exploring technical support for those interested in specific questions. So the indicator, the way that we've parameterized it right now is meant to be closer to species agnostic, so it's not representing a single species or single species habitat preferences. It's looking at more of the broad, on average, how connected is the network. So for anyone that's interested, we are very happy to chat with you whenever you're available and discuss how we could parameterize this model to answer a species-specific question. Maybe it's for West Slope cutthroat trout or rainbow trout, and assessing how connectivity benefits or is detrimental to that species. So with that, that's all I have today. I'd just like to quickly thank Lisa Neem and Yucheng Yang. So they are the heads of the Biodiversity Management Framework Science and Technical Committee that have been helping me develop these technical documents and moving through everything. And I also just want to thank everybody that was on those science and technical committees. There was too many names to list, but the dozens and dozens of people that have provided feedback over the years have been very helpful and have definitely helped improve this indicator dramatically from its initial inception. So with that, I'm just happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you for that great presentation, Brandon. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions, you can type them in using the GoToWebinar toolbar located on the right side of your screen. So it looks like we have a few coming in here. So our first question is, what are your assumptions for cumulative probability of flow? Are methods available on ABIM's website?
Yeah, so what we did is we have a fully connected stream network. And then from there, we're using packages in R to build just a general graph theory network. So within the graph theory network, you know who your neighbors are. And from there, you can develop algorithms that are able to search for the shortest distances between segments, but also the shortest distances in respect to passability. So these are not available, but if you have any questions about graph theory or like those, graph theory approaches and how to kind of answer a question like this, send me an email. I'm happy to chat later about this.
All right, our next question is, how's the model's accuracy about predicting and actual culverts that are hanging out there?
Yeah, so the model specifically for hanging culverts, the AUC score, depending on which bootstrap iteration we're using, kind of hovered anywhere between 0.82 to 0.85 was kind of the normal range. So it's reasonably accurate. From an individual culvert standpoint, if you took the model and pinpointed an individual culvert, it might be wrong, but that on average, predictive ability is fairly robust and shows hanging culverts occurring where we think they are occurring on the landscape.
Perfect. And our next question is on land management plans. How are you incorporating this information into regional and land management plans?
Yeah, so from my side of things, I was mostly key in developing these indicators, but there have been some requests through the Watercourse Crossing program to do a connectivity assessment for some of those high priority watersheds, such as the Berlin, Wildhay, and Swan River. In the past, there has been some desire to look at stream connectivity for the Beaver Hills region. So there's no formal plan in place. The biodiversity management framework is still in flux at the moment for kind of having a true regional indicator, but there are lots of groups within the planning division and even those outside of the AEP planning division that are starting to uptake this indicator and use it for their own questions in various parts of the province.
Perfect. Our next question. You mentioned that increased survey data could contribute to improved connectivity in some watersheds. Do you think that the decline in connectivity for some watersheds could also be due to increased survey data? For example, more barriers are identified and therefore the connectivity rating becomes more accurate?
Absolutely. So yeah, in those regions, like thinking of Fort McMurray region, where the hanging culvert model doesn't really predict many of them. But from the surveys that we've performed there, we know that there's lots of tech barriers out there. So connectivity is worse there because we've done surveys. Um, so yeah, I think in an ideal world, we would have a survey for every culvert. And maybe through the watercourse crossing program someday we'll be able to get there. But yeah, in the meantime, yeah, it is challenging to know if connectivity is going to improve or get worse as we get more culvert survey data out there.
All right, our next question. How will someone get a copy of the technical documents you're producing for this work? Will or are they available online?
Yeah, so my understanding is the technical document will also be made available online. I don't know where it will be available online, but if you send me an email, I can make sure that you get a copy of it and refer to the papers as well.
Perfect. And what looks like to be our final question is, can you please explain again the stream characteristics that go into the model for predicting hanging culverts?
Yeah, so there was a variety of variables. This model went through a few different versions at first. But the latest version, we use information on local stream properties. So we're getting what is the slope of that intersection between the road and stream segment. We get an estimate of a confluence bound slope. So what is the slope of that stream segment flowing into the culvert? We have information on the amount of upstream distance from that culvert. So trying to get a sense of potential flow into that culvert. We also use some watershed characteristics such as drainage density. So just the more stream segments there are, the higher the drainage density. Um, that's going to have an impact on hanging culverts or not. And then we also used a climate moisture index. So trying to capture that in some regions, they're going to be more wet than others, or might experience more precipitation. And that increased precipitation could also have impacts on hanging culverts. Yeah, if that didn't answer your question enough, send me an email and I'm happy to send you more information on it as well.
Perfect. And it looks like that was the last of our questions. There is one comment here. It says great presentation. Um, so thank you, Brandon, for that great presentation, and to all those who have joined today. Please join us again Tuesday, November 9th for our next webinar presented by Bruce Nielsen and Matthew Piper on the new Provincial Roadway Watercourse Crossing Construction Guidebook. And just a reminder, November 18th, AWC3 will be hosting a 3-hour webinar that will feature a variety of speakers and topics. Registration is free and can be completed using the link on your screen, which I guess I did not share that, and I will do right away. We hope to see you there. So thanks again, Brandon, and did you have any final comments?
No, just thank you for letting me talk here and show you the new indicator. And yeah, if there's any questions about using the data, just send me an email at ballen@ualberta.ca.
Awesome. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day, everyone.